Hello and welcome to this presentation with the topic Understanding the Benefits and Challenges of Teaching Creativity Online, which belongs to Unit 1 of the TICON learning content. The purpose of this presentation is for you to understand some benefits and challenges of teaching creativity online. The first section will introduce you to some benefits of understanding the creative process and teaching creativity online compared to a classroom setting. Furthermore, examples of situations or cases where the online setup was beneficial and successful are presented. We will listen to some experienced teachers where they give their insights and knowledge about teaching creativity online. We call them our TICON expert panel. Lastly, you will learn about understanding the online context, which includes some challenges of teaching creativity online and managing online creativity with our question-based checklist. In teaching creativity online, it is important to get acquainted with and understanding the creative process in order to actually teach creativity. So let's hear from our TICON expert panel of what they think the benefits of understanding the creative process is.
Actually, it makes the teacher creative first. While thinking on your lecture how to make it different, the lecturer learns and understands the methods and later the students. So the creativity begins with the lecturer. Afterwards, in online lessons, more communication begins. Students began to interest in lectures more. They began to talk and declare their thoughts more often.
I think we need to teach creativity to engineers because the creative process is very important for engineering courses and also important for engineering designs. It helps us to analyze and find the best solutions for best engineering designs, and it helps us to analyze the problems. So it helps us to solve problems related with engineering.
If they can understand the process itself, it demystifies, if you like, how they're going to be creative. It allows them then to think outside the box, and it gives them that structure where they can communicate effectively in teams with each other to be more creative. What we find is without the understanding of the process, the students from our experience have tended to maybe stall in terms of being creative. They get a little bit overwhelmed, but also they tend to copy what's been done before, and they don't know where to look to think outside of the box or to change the norms that they're used to.
I think from our perspective, it brings structure to what is an unknown for our students. I think it also helps in terms of the partners that we bring on board, in that we can kind of walk them through the journey that they're going to take with us. Everybody knows where they are at any one point in time, so student diaries get full and you know, they may miss sessions, etc. So I think it does give that orientation. I think the language and the nature of the creative process is inclusive in terms of the approach we use. So it kind of, it removes any hierarchy from the groups. So sometimes we would have, or we would always have, maybe undergrads mixed in with PhD students, etc. So it's something new to everybody. So you come to it kind of fresh and naive about the process. So everybody starts on page 1, line 1. I think I suppose the approach from what we've seen on campus is that it generates better innovations and more thoughtful considerations of problems. So it introduces empathy for our participants who complete the programs that we do. And I think we've seen the benefit of the outcomes. So, you know, whilst it would be wonderful if every student team came out with a Fortune 500 company at the end, we know that when they come through the process with us, that they will develop certain set of skills and that they will develop as a person, the whole teamwork aspect to it. So we know that, you know, it works and we can measure it as well.
So for the students is that they mainly have a more holistic view on their challenge. That's the one advantage, I think, that they don't just look at the facts or at the numbers, but they are more focused on the solutions. And another very important thing for the students is by applying creativity methodology to push them to step in the shoes of the customers or the problem owners, or however you will describe the people students are creating solutions for in an industry context as well as in a non-profit context. So it doesn't matter the context. The more important thing is that yet you step in the shoes and look at through the eyes of your customers or problem owners on your problem. I think these are the two benefits from a student's perspective, and from a teacher's perspective. I think it's much better to apply creativity methodology to encourage the students to work on the problem in a more entertaining way, I would say, not just putting in some facts and saying, okay, and find a solution right now. Design something or construct something, instead more design something.
I can teach students just to do it in a certain way, and they will probably get some results out of it. And I can also teach them to understand why does creativity work and so forth. I would always prefer the last because I think if you understand why instead of just the how, you simply get further. And also because creativity is not just a question of a specific method. They might help you, but you need a deeper sense, because in the definition of creativity, there's a certain kind of unknown, because creative ideas is those ideas that none others got and so forth. So you can't put it all in a fixed scheme.
What I think is the benefit about knowing the creative process and knowing what kind of phases it has is that you then don't end up with just saying, okay, we need brainstorming, but that you can go into the process and say, okay, it has several phases. We first need to open, so we need some inspiration methods, we need some association methods, later we need to combine the methods. And for each of these phases we need a specific method, and that's important.
Vorteile auf jeden Fall, dass man aufgeklärter ist, wenn man Bescheid weiß, auf was man sich da einlässt, was so vielleicht auch typische Entwicklungen sind, Stationen innerhalb des Prozesses. Wenn man das im Vorfeld weiß, fühlt man sich vielleicht auch sicherer, sich darauf einzulassen.
Also bei uns machen viele Informationsdesigner Projekte. Das ist sehr stark im Studiengang, und da braucht man auch Kreativität. Und da sind zwei Sachen wichtig. Zum einen ist es wichtig, dass man weiß, dass jeder Mensch kreativ ist von Natur aus. Und dass man auch Kreativität trainieren kann und die eigene Kreativität verstärken kann. Und das Zweite sind einfach, dass man gute Methoden kennt, die es erlauben, auf einfache Art und Weise auf neue Ideen zu kommen. Und das ist eigentlich eine super Basis. Wenn man da noch die Gruppenarbeit gut funktioniert und da keine Störungen sind, dann kann man in der Gruppe sehr gut kreativ sein. Und es geht dann natürlich auch online, wenn man sich kennt.
When teaching creativity, it can sometimes be difficult to see the benefits of doing it online. Let's hear what our TICON expert panel thinks about their benefits of teaching creativity online compared to a classroom setting.
Group working is very important for creativity techniques, and I usually perform group working in the classroom. However, when I experience that in online settings, group working and communication activities can be done independent of time, independent of place, so the students can continue using these techniques when I'm not at the classroom in the online setting. So I think it's an important advantage, so that I can give them some homeworks so that they can continue creating outside the classroom as well.
I think as a result of our current education system, students are not accustomed to thinking out of the box. So to trigger this creativity or their thinking out of the box, I believe young people are more willing to express themselves freely online, in online settings, as opposed to face-to-face situations. So I think they feel more comfortable online, therefore it's more important to increase these online settings.
I mean, I think you have opportunities for maybe like a better space for focus. Or another advantage could be that to some extent, when you have your students in their home environment, you can also ask the students to do activities that you can't do in your classroom, maybe.
The one that I've observed is from the online, all of the students that we would have, they would be from different companies, from different institutes. They've got different cultural backgrounds as well. And when you do online, you're breaking down the barriers, if you like, kind of to geographical locations, even to culture, industry cultures. You make it more available, if you like, to different types of stakeholders to come into the creative process. And creativity, a lot of time, it's about cross-fertilization of different thoughts, ideas, attitudes, norms. When we teach it full-time, they're in the room, it's the same set of students really involved in the same program that are available at that particular slot in the timetable. So you tend to get that group think straight away.
The main benefit is that you can reach further in terms of people that you can do stuff with. In a quantitative manner, you could get some benefits because if it's online, you could reach 5,000 people or 50,000.
Yeah. Do I see any benefits? There is benefits. The benefits would be accessibility. You can reach out, you know, students, you can bring as many students in as you possibly can hold on a Zoom call. You can bring expertise in from all over the globe. You can help a lot with the empathy piece and reach out and talk to people who are suffering from the problem and gain empathy from that online, a lot more than what you can do in person in the classroom.
Dass man auf schnelleren Weg vielleicht manchmal zum Ziel kommen kann, dass man Dinge spielerischer direkt durch Online-Tools umsetzen könnte. Also vielleicht auch wirklich einfacher, weil man ja wirklich auf 2D diese Ebene hat und in einem Workshop ja doch auch Dinge rumstehen, begriffen werden müssen, gegreift werden müssen. Und ich glaube, dass man so ein bisschen von der Geschwindigkeit schneller Dinge erreichen könnte.
Now that you have been introduced to some of the benefits of teaching creativity online, we can dive more into some examples. Here, our TICON expert panel provides some examples of situations or cases where the online setup was beneficial. Let's hear their examples.
In an online environment, you are much more flexible to adapt the environment. For example, if I do things on site with flip charts, with notebooks, etc., so I have to bring all the stuff with me, and then we can just take the stuff we have. And if you see, okay, the creative process is a little bit different than expected, then it's sometimes much harder to adapt than in an online environment. So if I, for example, use an online whiteboard where I have all these things available just on one click, say, okay, we are inventing right now a new environment, let's say a customer journey instead of an empathy map. And then I could just say, okay, we have hundreds, millions of virtual sticky notes to use and these kinds of things. This is much more flexible and much more easier to realize. So, and in particular with a large teaching load on the teacher's side, as in a University College of Applied Science, you can of course apply much more inspiring learning environment, digital, with in comparison, small amount of time to prepare the things. And this is a great advantage. So I once asked the students to create in a collaborative way a problem map. And we just defined the axes and some basic settings. And then 40 people started online to create such a map. And I think this is really a benefit of an online environment, that you can bring a large group of students into working simultaneously on one task. That is much harder to create in an on-site setting. So these massive, not massive, but let's say quite large group is collaborating on one task with one tool with an immediate outcome and reactions on each other. That's a stunning thing. I think that's really cool. And I really try to focus on that kind of stuff when I prepare my lectures.
Yeah, I mean, I was teaching one course where we were developing a training equipment, and then to simulate or do a study on how does that equipment work, I would ask the students to do some exercises in their home, and for example, do a push-up and and videotape it and see how does that, for example, what kind of space do you need for doing a push-up, and then share that, and then afterwards maybe do a creative session on, well, how can you develop a mechanism that would go into a machine that would help you do a push-up, for example. That would be one example where the students could actually, during the online session, do some activities in their home, which I would have difficulties, I think, persuading them to do in the classroom, because you're in your private space, so you can do different stuff.
In our online workshops, we have students from different cities or even from different countries that come together. And it would be practically impossible to get such a wide range of people together without an online setup.
I'm giving the students some online group works that they can perform when I'm not at the classroom. So they use different channels. For example, they use Discord channels, and they produce some Miro groups to continue working together. When they work together, and then they can, I can also contact, go into the Discord groups myself, or they share with me the Miro links, and then we can discuss about their works. So that helps us a lot for teaching creativity online.
What we're trying to teach them in the first year is how to be creative, you know, how to think outside the box, not just that they follow a particular formula and a pattern and they get the same output. So we had to end up teaching the creativity type modules in an online setting for the first and second years. So that was, it was quite a challenge to do that. But actually, it worked very well in a lot of ways, because the students themselves had never seen each other. And that is a big problem in terms of how do you create those relationships. So we ended up setting up through, it was Adobe Connect was the technology that we used, but it facilitates these breakout rooms. So we got them to go into small groups, tackle the problem from different perspectives. They could have a whiteboard that was there. They all started to write on the whiteboard. They even started to do things like, we'll say, with virtual post-its as well, and put them up there, and they could see where each other's perspectives were coming from. And because they didn't know each other before, it helped to form relationships that when they did come back in to a face-to-face setting, those relationships were already set up. They already knew each other in some form, and it helped them then to kind of work together to solve problems and to think outside the box as well, where they wouldn't have before.
We use an online collaborative platform called Mural, and that very fits in really nicely with the whole design thinking methodology. And we can embed videos and templates and all into each team and their site. So they get a huge amount of resources. So they can get resources from Stanford and resources from all around the globe in to help them with that, and to kind of add to, I would give them the basics on a Wednesday workshop. But then if they want to dig into any aspect of what I said, there's a huge amount of resources there that just click on, and there's videos and all sorts. So again, we would not be able to do that in an in-person situation. They would have to go looking for resources, and you couldn't curate it as well by just saying, this is your team page, this is what we did in week 1, here are all the resources here to help you go to the next stage. So I think that was really useful for them.
Ich könnte einen Fall nennen, das ist jetzt nicht Online-Lehre per se gewesen, aber das war im Einsatz von einem aktuellen EU-Projekt, wo ich Projektmitgestalterin bin, Cinema, und da haben wir Workshops durchgeführt, um konkrete Lösungen für ein Problem zu entwickeln, und haben hier Design Thinking Coachings gemacht, also auch einzelne Design Thinking Tools angewandt, und das fand ich überaus positiv, und da ist auch das quasi uns zugutekommen, was ich gerade beschrieben habe. Wir haben in kürzester Zeit wirklich Lösungen generiert. Die waren nicht perfekt, und ich will auch gar nicht sagen, dass der Workshop per se so perfekt gelaufen ist, aber wir sind auf jeden Fall überall zu einem Ergebnis gekommen. Wir haben vorher Ziele definiert, die wir erreicht haben, und das war sehr motivierend dann auch für die Teilnehmer.
In those situations or cases, the TICON expert panel also provides some examples of creativity methods which was used to make it successful. Let's hear about their succeeding creativity methods.
We used online sharing platforms like Miro, where groups of students can interact on a single document. They can put notes or questions for others and directly manipulate the document simultaneously. I think this completely triggers their will to interact. We observe that we get more active participation with the group online sharing platforms.
Actually, I am mostly using motivation videos. This is the base. And then later, after watching the motivation videos, brainstorming is my popular methods, one of the methods. And when we come to a conclusion, or when we come to a situation that we couldn't solve the problems, or when it is not understand the reason, the real reason, I am using the 5 whys.
Usually use the communication techniques and problem solving techniques, in fact. And I, for example, I also use some successful techniques like, for example, the 6-hat techniques. I think the most important and the most successful ones are group working techniques. And it helps us, the engineering students, to also have fun and motivation in order to create something together with their teammates, their colleagues. So that is great success for us.
Yeah. So we used Adobe Connect, and what we were trying to, if you like, simulate in that is really that brainstorming method. Now, what I do find, if you're using a brainstorming method, when we're face to face, I always got our students that they wrote their idea, for example, on a Post-it. Once we discussed the problem or what we were looking for, they went around and they explained what they were doing. At that particular point, they're not allowed to comment on anybody else's idea. They just have to listen. And what we used to get them to do was ball it up, the Post-it, and physically just throw it behind them. It was kind of a physical action to say, let go of the idea. And also they were listening to each other while they were, they'd be reading out the Post-it, but they'd be listening to everybody else read out theirs as well. And then we give them fresh Post-its and we ask them, okay, now that you've heard everybody else's viewpoint, write down another idea as how you think this could be solved. And you started to get kind of more of a convergence of what maybe how to solve this problem. And they were listening unbiasedly to each other's ideas. So that really helps. Now, when you're doing that online, it is a little bit more difficult. But the way that we did it, we used kind of the whiteboards where they had to put up their Post-it, if you like, their virtual Post-it on what it is. But then we would blank it, we would clear it, and we'd say, now that you've heard everybody's and you see them, let's do a fresh start again. And, kind of see, can we have a go at this again? It's good, but it's time consuming. That would be the only thing. And it takes a little bit of setup by the lecturer beforehand, rather than just walking in with a pack of Post-its and handing them out. You do have to structure it that little bit more if you're doing it online.
Right, we use a design thinking approach, and I think if you're looking at the creativity methods that we use to make it successful, they're all largely curated through Mural. And they are the typical, I suppose, creativity methods that we will see. So we use storyboarding, and we get our students and our participants to use storyboarding. We use a lot of reframing and persona development. So in any of the projects that we're involved in, we try and lead with not just a challenge, but a persona who's experiencing the challenge that we're trying to solve. We get students and participants to do a lot of reframing and mind mapping as they go through the process. And then I suppose the other one that we'd kind of introduce creativity methods in, we use a lot of brainstorming. And it really is around kind of threading through those methods through every workshop that we run. So that they're building creative muscle, if you like, that, every session is based on both the content delivery. Then there is a facilitated breakout where there's some self-directed learnings that result in them completing templates or a certain threshold of whatever that session is focused on. But they're very much, we do a little bit and then it's over to the team to really develop out the balance of the session and then report back to make sure that it isn't just about theory. Creativity is about the practice of. So a lot of what we do is focused on, actually get your hands on, get your heads in, and that's where the magic happens.
Also jetzt im Konkreten in dieser Situation waren es, wie gesagt, Design Thinking Methoden. Da gibt es ja überaus viele, da gibt es ja diese Canvases, die man anwenden kann, und ich kann mich ganz gut erinnern, dass jetzt explizit das Empathy Map Canvas, wo man so einen Bezug zu dem Kunden hat, sozusagen, dass das gut gelaufen ist. Das Team Charter Canvas, weil das sehr stark eben immer auf die Motivation des Teams eingeht und die Werte, die man quasi als Team auch irgendwie in einem Projekt hat. Und ansonsten habe ich auch schon mal Design-Sprints angewandt, die ich ganz gut
Also unsere Studis arbeiten ja gern mit Miro, mit diesen Miro-Boards, und haben damit sehr gute Erfahrungen. Ich selber setze gern Padlet ein, weil man da auch Sachen gut strukturieren kann. Das machen unsere Seminarteilnehmer. Also sicherlich verbreitet ist das Brainstorming, das ist ja die bekannteste und einfachste Methode, die ist sehr effektiv. Oder auch das Brainwriting, oder dass man gemeinsam mit Padlet oder mit einem Mindmap-Programm Ideen zusammenträgt und sammelt. Diese Methoden sind ziemlich verbreitet, weil sie einfach auch so einfach sind. Von daher ist das sicher eine ganz gute Ausgangsbasis. Aber darüber hinaus gibt es eben noch andere, die sehr effektiv sein können. Zum Beispiel auch die Disney-Methode, die mit verschiedenen Räumen arbeitet, wo die Räume inspirieren, strukturieren, Möglichkeiten bieten, als Gruppe zusammenzuarbeiten. Sowas wünsche ich mir für unsere Hochschule, dass wir sowas haben. So 3 Räume, in die ich dann nach und nacheinander gehen kann, wo ich dann in verschiedenen emotionalen Zuständen bin.
In overall, the teaching of creativity online can influence both the teacher, the lesson itself, and the students. Let's hear the TICON expert panel of how the use of creativity methods in online teaching have influenced them as a teacher, the lecturers, and the students.
For me as a teacher, I would say it's so easy to observe the creative process. In particular, when students are working in smaller classes and smaller groups, I can just have an overview about all the whiteboards, and I can see what's happening on all these whiteboards. I can immediately comment on them, so interact with the students, which is much easier than in comparison to strolling around the room. So that's an advantage. Another thing is that things keep present, and it's easy to archive them and to use them for a different purpose, and just to get back to the things, say, oh, this is what we did 1 hour, 1 week or 2 weeks ago, so that you're working on a thing and you have your protocol, so to speak, your minutes and your results of a lecture. And the more you think about an expected outcome and the links between the outcomes of different sessions, the better this is. And this is not that time consuming for me as a teacher, as well as for the students. And then this is also an advantage from the perspective of the students, from my point of view, that if you design a whiteboard or a digital learning environment in general, they can always easily get back to the things they did before, and they can adjust them, and they can put things and redevelop things. Just to give you an example, I'm applying that kind of methodology in my methodology classes, and the task for the students there is to come up with a research design in social science related to a certain kind of thing. So we walk them via these whiteboards through all these stages of this development process, from creating a research question and then doing some literature reviews and then coming up with a research question and then operationalization, etc., etc. And if you do that step by step, and they always come up with a preliminary result, they can get back to these results and use them for their current or final design. And that's really a good one.
Actually, at the beginning, I learned new method, and then my students began to more interested in my classes. They became more talkative in time, and their design and their results were improved. Later, the students had aware of different types of lectures and began to use their intelligence in a different way. They realized their actual potential, actually.
The impact is problem-solving capabilities of students. I can see that I can also observe that the engineering students can solve problems more easily when we give them these techniques and when they perform these techniques together. And I can also see when I'm doing group works, when I perform some groups in interdisciplinary combinations, they can perform easier, they can perform great as an impact. They can solve problems more easier, because if there are some specific different thinking visions in the group, they can solve problems more easily.
Vorteil auf jeden Fall der Zeitfaktor nochmal, dass man auch schneller zu ersten Ergebnissen kommen kann, dass man spielerischer damit umgeht. Ich fand es auch toll, wir haben da in Zoom vor allen Dingen gearbeitet und unter Einsatz auch von Miro, dass man die Teams auch mal alleine hat arbeiten lassen können. Also das kann man im physischen Raum auch, aber ich fand das trotzdem nochmal anders. Man konnte auch schneller dann gerufen werden als Moderator oder als Helfer, wenn irgendwas unklar war. Ich konnte irgendwie schneller springen von einer Session zur anderen und hatte trotzdem das Gefühl, es ist alles irgendwie am Laufen, man hat einen guten Überblick. Also ja, dieses Spielerische einfach und die Dynamik, die dadurch entsteht, fand ich sehr gut.
Now that you have learned about some of the benefits of teaching creativity online, we also need to address some of the challenges. Here our TICON expert panel presents what they think is the most challenging about teaching creativity online. Let's hear them.
Sometimes I'm a bit too ambitious, in particular in the beginning. I said, okay, we can realize things within 20 or 30 minutes. And then it turns out it always took more time. And so that would be that's my learning. And I would like to share this with all the other colleagues, that you really take time that in realizing things, that you need buffers, and that sometimes it takes more time, that people start to work with each other. Sometimes they just need some breaks to relax, and in particular if you send them in breakout sessions in a Zoom environment, for example, an excellent way to assign people to groups, by the way, but it takes its time from when you send somebody in a room until people really start working. And I tend to underestimate these periods of time, and that is later a challenge, because then after 10 or 15 minutes the people come back with no or just scarce ideas what they want to do, and that should of course not happen. So because then they are losing the flow, and then they don't get the idea, why should I apply that kind of methodology, in particular when they're not used to the methodology. So in a masterclass of designers, I think these kind of people, they can cope with it. But if you would like to apply that methodology, let's say in a class of the engineers in the second years, and they're applying it for their very, very first time, that could be frustrating for the students.
I personally prefer, when you want to teach creativity or motivate creative thinking, then I often prefer to have some kind of hands-on experience, and also maybe directly with students, so that we can try things, tinkering and think with your hands. And that is, I would say, is somewhat difficult in the situation. You miss some of the, you can say, details in the discussion. I mean, when you can comment on what you see directly, and so on. You can maybe comment more on the discussion that the students are having, and so on, when they try to come up with ideas or solutions on the problem they're working on. That's the main challenge, as I see it, because you have this kind of indirect contact.
Yeah, the biggest challenge I've seen is the thing that when 5 people are together and they can look in their eyes, you can create this synergy where 2 people come up with something they didn't think of themselves. So they had it in them, but it only came up because they were together, so to speak. When you want to do that online, it poses some challenging on the technical equipment in how can they communicate online. Of course, they can speak to each other, but there's some limits because we can't use all our senses. We're actually limited to mostly using our ears, yes, and our eyes, but the whole body we can't really use.
Well, of course, not being able to see the student's face is hard. You cannot tell if they are with you or if they are bored or even sleepy. But when I feel like I'm losing interest, I try to come up with personal questions to engage the student. And I believe putting little quizzes or short Q&A sessions quite often during the course of the class helps their interconnection.
I'm spending more time while preparing my lectures And I'm spending many hours to search, especially one specific video for the lecture, because sometimes you just need to concentrate and you just need to find this specific video. And if you want to change the method of the creativity, I need to search and find the real method, which is convenient for my lecture. And sometimes you couldn't really get what you give. Because at online teaching, you couldn't understand the students' real feelings due to the lack of the face-to-face contacts and eye contact, of course.
Not being able to make, eye contact, sometimes physical contact with the students, the dialogues are not that impactful for us. So I think the most challenging thing is the eye contact.
Yeah, so having your tools ready, because what you find with creativity, for example, those post-it boards, you more or less put up little green and white post-its, and it's really useful. But how do you embed that in to maybe the teaching platform, kind of in a live session? So sometimes that can be a little bit time consuming just to set up. What you find as well with creativity and the tools to support it, it's not one technology, it is several. So that can sometimes be very daunting for a student, because they're trying to kind of get to grips with, for example, Adobe Connect or Microsoft Teams and the teaching platform there. They're using different ones for different lectures, depending on what suits the teaching style. But now you're bringing in, kind of storyboard technologies with it. You're bringing in all these other virtual creativity tools that are there, and it can become quite daunting for them because they're not using this on a day-to-day basis. So that in itself can kind of be, I think, one of the key challenges. The other one as well is that when you're in a room, for example, if we compare that face-to-face, you can spot somebody who's naturally shy, who kind of maybe withdraws back, and there are behaviors that you can adopt yourself to kind of facilitate bringing them into the fore a little bit more, getting their opinion on things. When it's virtual and it's online, the type of quiet person or shy person, they can be even more in the background, and it is, without kind of embarrassing and that, it's very difficult to actually call them out to make them participate in a way that doesn't feel like you're harassing them in some way. So that sometimes can be certainly a challenge.
And I think one of the most challenging things is perhaps where you're giving a one-off session with groups, and the trust maybe with you and them isn't there as opposed to within the team. And they disengage. So there's no camera on, there is no mic on, or you're in a classroom, an online environment where that's the norm from the lecturer's perspective, because maybe they're covering a big group session of content, and it's a very theoretical facing module, and you're maybe invited in to deliver something on creativity, but you don't fit the context that the students have been trained in so far, and you're kind of parachuted in and maybe it isn't what you're used to. So for me, I think it has been the case where there's been one-off lectures. It's only happened to me once, but I still remember it, that it was hugely challenging because the environment was cameras off, chat off, mics off for this particular cohort.
Ich denke, die größte Herausforderung ist die Motivation. Und ich glaube auch, es gibt ja jetzt schon auch Wege, wie man das gut hinbekommt, aber ich glaube, da muss man auch noch viel mehr machen, wirklich die Leute von Anfang an abzuholen, zu motivieren. Gerade, also Sie kennen das vielleicht auch als Studierende, wenn Sie eine Lehrer sind, man sitzt vor diesem Bildschirm, man hat manchmal auch irgendwie eine schwarze Wand, also wenn manche die Kameras ausmachen. Ich finde, es ist viel schwieriger, die Leute von Anfang an am Ball zu halten und bis zum Ende auch zu motivieren. Über eben so virtuelle Online-Lehre als jetzt vor Ort, weil man doch in einem physischen Raum auch den Raum hat, der etwas mit einem macht. Man hat tatsächlich den Moderator und die anderen Teilnehmer live vor Ort. Gestik, Mimik wird ganz anders wahrgenommen, die Aura eines Menschen wird ganz anders wahrgenommen, und ich finde, dass dieser Motivationspunkt bei Lehre im physischen Raum besser umsetzbar ist als aktuell in der Online-Lehre, und da müsste man noch mehr machen, auf jeden Fall.
Also was ich immer wieder erlebe, ist, dass wenn Methoden eingesetzt werden, dass es Leute gibt, die finden bestimmte Methoden ganz wunderbar und ganz toll, und andere können damit gar nichts anfangen. Und deshalb ist es wichtig, so ein Methodenspektrum zu haben, dass man nicht eine alleinselig machende Methode vertritt und denkt, da hängt alles dran, sondern dass man die Vielfalt hat. Und wenn man merkt, die Methode, mit der komme ich jetzt nicht weiter, wie mit dem Brainwriting oder mit der Disney-Methode, dann nehme ich halt eine andere Methode und bin da flexibel. Das ist wichtig. Und ich habe wirklich auch immer wieder erlebt, dass es Methoden gibt, wo manche Teilnehmer sagen, super, toll, perfekt, ich brauche nichts anderes mehr, und andere konnten damit gar nichts anfangen. Und das ist vollkommen in Ordnung. Wir sind halt sehr verschieden. Und manche sind so visuell orientiert, die malen gerne, die machen Wissenslandkarten und andere Sachen. Andere, die versuchen erstmal zu strukturieren. Da ist so ein Brainwriting zum Beispiel hilfreich. Und dann gibt es Leute, die wollen sich an einer Sache festhalten. Für die ist Design Thinking jetzt nicht unbedingt so optimal, weil es ja doch sehr viel Wahrheit braucht, bis ich wirklich dann ein Ergebnis habe. Also es hängt auch von den Persönlichkeiten ab. Aber deshalb haben wir ja die Vielfalt, und deshalb gibt es auch vielfältige Möglichkeiten, die eigene Kreativität weiterzuentwickeln. Das ist schon auch was ganz Individuelles. Wichtig ist nur, dass Menschen wirklich von Natur aus kreativ sind, wie ich schon sagte, und dass es das nicht gibt, dass Menschen unkreativ sind. Oft wird es uns ausgetrieben, in der Schule zum Beispiel. Aber wenn wir das zulassen, dann kann sich da ganz viel entwickeln.
To understand the online context, we have developed a checklist of how to manage creativity online with questions you as a teacher can ask yourself. This includes setting the correct mindset for online teaching, what digital proficiency you as a teacher have, the technical infrastructure needed for the online teaching, and lastly, feedback and improvement. As a teacher, you have to have the right mindset when teaching creativity online. You can ask yourself questions like, are you ready to have an open approach to teach creativity online? Why do you feel your higher engineering students need to equip themselves with creative methods? Are you ready to explore different creative methods and experiment with them? If you have done online sessions on your topic and subject, what have been the issues or problems, and how could they affect teaching creativity online? If you have taught creativity before to your students, can the methods and techniques then be adapted to online context? Overall, does your syllabus or online content give sufficient emphasis to divergent thinking activities online? To teach creativity online, you also need some level of digital proficiency. You can start asking yourself what level you already have now. Are you a starter, more in between, or do you have a more advanced level in digital tools? Based on that and your experience, did you then select the tools for teaching creativity corresponding to your digital proficiency? You should also consider your students' digital proficiency when selecting the tools in the online teaching, and perhaps also the different learning curves among students with the tools you have selected. Besides your students and your own digital proficiency, you should also consider the technical infrastructure. You can ask the questions, does your organization support the digital tools you have selected? Is there any conflict between the digital tools and methods you are using? Do your students have the necessary infrastructure on their side, for example, devices, internet connection, etc.? Do your students have access and necessary permission or license for the tools you are using? And do the tools you use pose a barrier to any students in your class? This could be, for example, special needs for some students. Lastly, in our checklist of managing the online creativity teaching, you need to consider the feedback and potential for improvements. You can then ask, have you collected feedback on the tools and methods you have used? Have you created an improvement action plan based on the feedback? Have you developed your syllabus or online content to make sure that your students understand how their creativity will be measured? Congratulations, you are now done with the section B of Unit 1. We hope you could get some insights into the benefits and challenges of teaching creativity online, and can use the checklist of managing creativity teaching online. Authors of these slides were Manon van Leeuwen from EOLAS, Siam Nair from NUI Galway, and Andreas Vilhøft from University of Southern Denmark. The voiceover was done by Andreas Vilhøft from University of Southern Denmark. For participating in the videos, we want to thank our TICON expert panel, and in this presentation, the experts are mentioned here.